Appreciate you guys being here. Anebi, right?
Yeah.
Anebi. Anebi and I connected, man, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he reached out and said, hey, let's host something about buying businesses. Obviously has been my world for the last 2 or so years, and it just felt like such a cool intersection between what we're doing community-wise. He just bought a business, how long ago now?
8 months ago,
8 months ago.
counting.
I just bought something a year and a half ago, almost a year and a half ago. So just a perfect, I think the perfect time for both of us to chat about what it's actually been like and the journey leading up to the actual purchase, since it's so fresh for both of us. And so I see a lot of faces that have come to the community events before, so welcome back. And it's actually really cool to host something about the searcher and M&A space for the first time. I actually built the bones of Park SMB around the searcher community to begin with, and then it transitioned to more just general business ownership. But wanting to kind of start reintroducing that because it's just fun, and it's really important to get out and talk about what that process actually looks like, because I think there's a lot of sexiness to it right now, and it is
Thanks,
by no
Cody.
means
Cody
yeah,
Sanchez.
yeah, by no means is it sexy. So yeah, I think we'll just really dive into his story, maybe a little bit about my journey and what we're doing now and what it's been like, and then open the floor up to Q&A. Really answer any questions about the search process leading up to purchase, the SBA process, like really anything that comes to mind, happy to answer. And then, yeah, we'll just actually questions as well throughout. I want to mention that if something comes to mind, feel free to raise your hand and we can pause. We don't have to wait till the Q&A. So I wouldn't want you guys to have a question and then have to write it down and remember 30 minutes later. So if something comes to mind, just raise your hand, or if we don't see you, just stop us and we'll help out. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Sounds
you
good.
want to jump into it? Quickly introduce yourself and what you're doing.
Yeah, so Anebi here. I started looking into business acquisition probably 2-3 years ago, and probably should sit down here.
Yeah.
Started looking into it. Ben Kelly, some of you have probably seen his stuff, right? I was posting about it a ton. Same with Cody Sanchez and some others, but it felt unreal. It felt unreachable. I thought you needed to have lots of funds, come from money and all of that stuff. But the more I dug into the process, on YouTube and the videos, the more I realized it was actually reachable. I had to kiss a lot of frogs through the process, I like to say, before I found a deal last year. And part of what Shawn and I are trying to do right now is like take you behind the scenes so you can actually look at how it works, not the sensationalized stuff out there, which sells, right? But like the real stories behind it, the being able to get into the acquisition game, how to de-risk SBA process and some of those things. But that's the primary motivator for me. I wish I had things like this 2 years ago when I started seriously pursuing the process. So that's kind of about me. Prior to that, or for the past decade or so, I've been in tech. Right now, for my day job, I lead digital solutions for the state of Arizona, and I've done things like that in the past decade. And I started craving building a legacy for my family, getting out of the corporate game eventually, and business acquisition seemed like a very interesting pathway and asset class to get into. So we'll jump right into it.
Cool. Quickly highlights. I was in consulting out of college for 3.5 or so years. Decided to move into something completely different. Bought a retail ice cream company August of 2023, and have opened 2 new locations since. It's purely retail, and then have been working on a few other projects like the small business community and some other ventures. But the purchase was 2023, and we'll jump into that process for the both of us. But I don't know if you talked a little bit about the company itself already, but
good idea.
Let's just jump into like, how did you even find this deal, and did you have a clear idea of this industry being like your go-to, or did it just come across
No.
your desk? And
Not at all. So the company is Shipman Cleaning. I'm still maintaining the original name. It's a commercial and residential carpet, tile, and upholstery cleaning company. We've added a commercial janitorial service as part of it. And as of a few weeks ago, just rolled out a maid cleaning service, so residential, focused on deep cleanings for houses and standard cleanings. It's subscription based, although we do one-time cleanings as well. But when I started looking into it, I was more or less industry agnostic. I didn't know what I didn't know. I just wanted to get into the acquisition game and buy something that was cash flowing. I looked at a few different industries, cleaning / janitorial. I looked at light manufacturing and a bunch of other ones, retail. But I settled on this deal partly because a friend of a friend introduced me to the broker. He had sold his business through the same broker. So I started talking with her, gave her the criteria for what I was looking for. And this was one of the deals she presented to me. It made sense at the time, and we'll talk more about this. From a risk perspective, I felt like it was a less risky endeavor. In hindsight now, obviously my theory has changed, but so that's why I went for cleaning. Cleaning is so very interesting because the upside, right? Your total addressable market technically is everyone, which is a blessing and a curse. I wanted something that had a huge total addressable market in the geographical area. So that's why, beyond the introduction, the warm intro from a friend, that's why I looked at the cleaning space.
yeah, how did you come up with your search criteria? Like what went into that, and what are some like key things that you, let's say, just wrote down as part of that criteria? Like this is why I went with this style or this size business.
So for me, it needed to be scalable beyond where it was at. This company has been stuck for years at around 250K revenue, but with some light research, I figured there was a way to scale it beyond just the service-based stuff, to go after what I'd call like vertical integration, right? Right now we do the cleaning, we show up, we clean, it's a service. But as a tech software guy, I was thinking, what if we added some software enablement to this, right? We'd be able to be more lean and scale it up if we started doing like a software model for our competitors and also some of our clients. That's a new line of service. So I could see the pathways to scaling the business. So that was one criteria, scalability. Longevity was another thing, and longevity in terms of how long it has been in operation for. For this deal, this is a 13-year-old business. So as of last year, 12-year-old business. It was in 2 years. So the average business, right, fails in, we think, the first 5 years. Many fail within the first year. Mm-hmm. So the fact that it was 12 years old, in my opinion, reduced some of the risk. They had done a lot of this startup stuff and experimentation. So longevity, time in business. And then also, I didn't want something like to buy myself a job where now I bought a cleaning company and I'm the guy who has to go clean. Now I can do that, and I've done that on occasion. We were here at Kiln on Saturday, bright and early, 7 a.m. I had to let my folks in to clean, which was fun. I hoisted the ladders.
Like family or your team?
My team.
Okay.
My team, yeah. I'm not hiring my family in this right now. When my kids are old enough, maybe.
Yeah.
Now three-year-old and a 4-month-old.
Perfect age.
Too early to work.
Clean it up.
Yeah. But so I was here with my team to let them in. So on occasion is that, but like for the most part, I wanted something that I could build out an operational team that would run the day-to-day of the business, and I could focus on sales and growth, like the chief revenue officer type stuff, maybe some operational fixes. So those were some key criteria for me.
So we'll talk about the size of the deal.
Profitability, of course.
Yeah. So we'll talk about the size of the deal, because this is interesting. It's very different than what you would typically go for if you've done your research in the small business acquisition space. Like this is definitely a quote unquote small deal.
Very small deal.
So
relatively.
Going back to the structure, like the deal structure and the financing piece. How did you finance the deal, if you financed it, or did you just go straight cash and seller financing? And was there anything creative that you did when you structured it?
Yeah, so for this deal, I went the route of SBA, an SBA loan. SBA typically have you do 20% or 10% down for the total size of the deal. This deal was a small, relatively small one. This was a $200K deal. So SBA loan for that, and it was multiples of EBITDA for what the owner was doing, right? 47K or so was EBITDA, so multiples 2.6x or so of that was what he got. And then the rest was used as working capital. For the 10% down commitment, I had an investor, cash investor. So really no cash out of pocket for me, right? I got an investor who's sound. Okay. And if we need to raise the volume too, we can do that. But is this better? Okay, great. So I got an investor who did the 10% down commit.
And just to be clear, you did 10%, not 20%.
Yeah, 10%. Okay. 10% was what I did for this deal.
Cool.
And my investor put down the 10% commit. And what he gets in return is there's some leeway, like 10 to 15% paid out of profit. So if we don't make a profit, he doesn't get paid. So for me, from a risk perspective, that was really nice to have an investor who was willing to sort of like flex things a bit depending on what the profit margins are any given month.
Do you think you structured it the right way for this size deal, or would you have done something different?
In hindsight, one, I wouldn't have bought it for the price I bought it for. After getting, and I had a financial an accountant to go through the deal, but there's so many things I didn't know at the time. Like EBITDA is a very interesting thing, right? People play fast and loose with EBITDA. The earnings before depreciation and interest and stuff. Like, yep. It's like I would have looked more so at like what the seller was actually paying himself, like cash in the bank. The EBITDA is a very loose term that folks use, and I don't think he was trying to be disingenuous, but that was just an easy way to calculate it. So I probably would have bought for smaller to increase the amount of cash I have for working capital. There were also assumptions around the equipment would be able to buy as part of the deal, which turned out later on, like van, for example. I had to spend $35K to buy a new van and what we call a truck mount, which is the machine you use for cleaning. That was supposed to be part of the deal initially because the seller thought he could just sell me that. But turns out he was in a weird lease to own thing, and those guys wouldn't let him get out of it. So there are little things like that that I if I knew, right, and clarified properly, would have changed like how we structured the deal.
Who did you have on your like deal team going into the deal? I know you said you had an accountant to review financials with you. But was there anybody else that you worked with through the process? Or?
So I didn't have a QOV provider. Like a QOV provider typically will help you do like a quality of earnings report. That shows a lot of weird financial mathematics, right, and gymnastics that sellers do. So I didn't have that. I was that. With some AI tooling and stuff, I was like, we're good. But I didn't have a QOV provider. I had a financial person who looked at it. We didn't have legal. I did a lot of the research myself. So a lot of it was me, myself and I, and then a little bit from the financial person I had.
Okay. Would you, looking back, if you bought the same size deal, would you bring on those experts, or do you feel like you knew enough to be deadly going into it? Maybe you use some templates or things like that to structure, let's say, even the purchase agreement? Or was that on the broker and you guys kind of drafted that together?
We drafted that together with the broker. At the time, I thought I knew enough, but now I know I didn't know nearly enough, right? If you think of like learning, right, there's a framework I like to use. It's like the regions of competence. There's no unconscious incompetence. I was unconsciously incompetent at the time, but I thought, I know better.
Yep.
And then there's conscious incompetence where you're like, I know some things, but holy crap, there's a lot more I don't know. I feel like I'm there right now. And then there's conscious competence. You know a lot. Maybe if you think about it, you know where to look. You know a lot, but you know where to look for the stuff you don't know. And then there's, unconscious competence where you're doing it in your sleep, right? I don't know if there are probably some realms, right? Some areas of competence where you actually get there. I don't know if I'd ever get there with the business acquisition stuff, but at least now I feel like I know about what I don't know, and that's interesting. But at the time, I thought like I knew a lot more from all the Cody Sanchez and Ben Kelly videos
Right.
I had watched.
Yeah. Who would you bring on as part of your deal team? Like who are the, let's say, top 3 experts, not just like by name, but industry or category? Who would you want to have on the team with you?
Yeah, so having a good broker, there are a lot of good brokers out there, but a lot of shady ones. So having a good broker, I think, is an amplifier for your search process. It's like having a recruiter, right? If you're job searching, you could do it yourself and all of that stuff. But if you know a good recruiter and they know the hiring manager, it's a direct, resume access. So using that analogy, a broker can be that for you. If you have a great broker or a great team of brokers, if I just use broker as a persona, right? Having a lot of those is helpful. A QOV provider to help you dive into the financials, the quality of earnings. And is EBITDA really what the owner says it is? Is cash flow really good? Can you sustain the deal with debt service and paying yourself a certain amount? Like all of those things, a QOV provider will help you dig into those. So those are 2 key folks I would bring in. And obviously investors, if you have access to good investors, that can be helpful because you can go after way bigger deals than you would be able to do on your own. So those are like 3 key personas I would. How about for you, actually?
I would say the same. I would add a legal team on there, or just a one-off, even just an advisor, if you will, because a purchase agreement for the size businesses we bought, it's not super complex, right? Like the biggest part is the deal terms and then the non-compete. Like everything else is kind of just the normal legal jargon. But when you get into like very complex, sizable businesses, I would say, and especially when there's multiple partners and investors and all of that involved, like it was just a straight deal for me. You're the sole owner with, one investor. More straightforward than, a $30 million revenue business with 8 partners. So that's when it gets a little scary. Go for it.
Yeah. Question. Why didn't you buy a business within the industry you already were thinking?
Question was, why did he not buy a business in the industry he was already an expert or a potential expert in?
So I've been in tech 11 years or so, and I wanted to divest away from that. So it was intentional to get out of tech a bit. I've burnt out a few times with my job. So I think part of it was trying to diversify and do something else. It's a lot more painful because I'm essentially starting from the ground up, like to learn a new industry and try to scale it. Part of that is part of the fun, but the big motivator was to divest away from tech a little bit more.
Go for it.
In terms of the deal team, did either of you guys consider using an SBA loan broker, or have any thoughts on those?
So did we use an SBA loan broker?
I did not. I worked with an SBA bank, approved funding bank, and they had a lot of good insights, but did not use an SBA specific broker.
Was your deal like pre-approved by SBA through your broker? Okay.
Yes, it was.
So that was a part of why I went with the SBA bank that I did, is because I had no SBA connections. I just knew a ton of brokers, and so whoever the broker had worked with or was currently working with on deals, that's who I went with. Looking back, getting a pre-approval from an SBA bank honestly means nothing because they're going to do due diligence on you anyways. So they're looking at the deal, EBITDA, and just the business itself, but you are sort of the hitch as to whether the deal will get done or not. So even if the business is cash flowing, if you have no assets and no money and all of that, doesn't matter, right? They're not going to approve the deal. So I went with the SBA bank simply because it was pre-approved through the broker. And I thought, oh, cool, this will be an easy 30 days. They've already looked at the deal and I have money, I have assets, cool. But 90 days later, and you could have used any bank, it would have been the same exact process. So SBA loan brokers are very helpful. I have one that's pretty, you've probably ran into Matthias and some of the other people on Twitter, but those are good examples of brokers that will connect you with, I would say, seasoned SBA banks. Like there are some newer banks that have come in and they just don't have a strong process, so it takes a lot longer than it needs to. But if you have somebody who's dialed in and they've done 1,000 deals, that's helpful. So.
And even among SBA banks, right, like you were saying, some have done a lot more deals and some are like considered premium SBA partners. And those are the best ones to go with because they can do majority. Part of why they can move so fast or faster is because they can do majority of those decisions in-house. SBA has already given them the green light, I think up to a certain dollar, like 3 million or something like that. If it's a much bigger deal, then they have to involve the SBA employees on some of those things. But that could be the key difference. Some of the newer banks may not be like premier or premium type partners, so it's just going to take a lot longer because they don't do everything or most, like 90% of the deal in-house.
Yeah, and there's a lot of industry-specific banks too. Like, let's take a Live Oak, for example. Like they would never touch a restaurant deal unless it was like a 20-unit Taco Bell, right? Very predictable. But they're not going to touch a 3-location ice cream shop doing, 1.2 million in revenue. Much too small for them and, very risky. So the process might be sped up depending on who you're going to work with. So an SBA, my SBA lender actually didn't do a whole lot of restaurant deals before mine. I just had a good relationship with them. So it probably took an extra month versus somebody who was restaurant or food service specific or just did, something like to his industry. If it was somebody who just did home services, or commercial services, that might move a lot faster because they just know the numbers and they understand these deals. So look at industry-specific banks as well. Go for it. Go for it.
So for your deal, if your investor covered pretty much the 10%, was there something that you had to show that, like cash-wise or whatever, in order for them to be able to approve it?
Everyone hear the question? Cool.
So in my case,
Restate the question.
Oh, so I'll state the question. So he was asking if there was something I had to show my investor, right, to be
SBA.
or the SBA for them to be interested in the
like
deal.
what was your skin in the game?
Yeah. So on the SBA side, I'll start there, right? They looked at the revenue of the business, how long it's been around. They'll look at tax returns, usually about 3 years is standard of the business to see how revenue has been doing. They also look at you as an individual, right? If you have a W-2 job, salary, how much you have in assets, savings, they looked at all of that for me. It's as part of their risk profile for you as a borrower.
Real quick, do you mind sharing percent of what you own relative to the investor?
So
are you cool with that?
My deal is interesting because I own 100%
Got it.
of it, but my investor just gets paid.
He gets profit.
Yeah, profit, right. He didn't care about skin in the game. Part of the deal is I've known this investor for like 30 years. So there is that, right? He trusts me. And that's one thing I would say, trust is a very big factor. If an investor trusts you as an operator or as a person, it really changes the game for their risk appetite. So that was a big thing for me.
So the fact that you have 100, they're definitely putting the personal guarantee on you. They're looking at your assets. They're looking at your cash. They're looking at all these things.
Yeah.
So you basically, like going back to his question, you had to put all of your skin in the game, essentially.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
everything that
pretty
you owned was reviewed and assessed and approved. If you owned, if you owned less than 20%, if you owned literally 19.99%, you wouldn't have to be part of that review at all.
Exactly.
Same with the investor. If he owned 10% and you own 90, it would fall on your shoulders if the business went,
Yeah. Because usually SBA will look at every partner that owns about 20% or more. So if you wanted to get creative, you can have an investor that owns 19.9%, right? Technically,
Yeah.
like
It happens all the time. You'll do like a bunch of 10% owners. If you want to be the person that they review, or you have a stronger partner with more assets, more cash, more everything, put them as a 20% and put yourself as a 10, and the remaining, structure it accordingly. But if you don't have the backing for the bank to feel comfortable, then you should be a 19 or below, or maybe you just shouldn't buy the deal at all. But yeah, if you don't want to, if you don't feel like your financial situation or your life situation is structured accordingly, then just be cognizant about how much you're owning of that business, and you can just get out of that by doing less than 20.
Yeah, all kinds of creative ways to structure deals. Like if you start looking into it with who owns what and assets and all of that stuff. So hopefully that answers your question with what they looked at. But yeah, SBA will look at so many different things with your assets.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, two questions really. The first one is, what was the discussion with the owners that you were purchasing from in terms of their staying around after, post deal, and kind of benefits or liabilities that introduced to you? That'll be my.
Yeah. Nice. Do you want to go?
Sure, I can go first. So for me, part of the negotiation was keeping them for 90 days at no cost. Like I wasn't going to pay a consulting fee or anything. I mean, we've had to reach out even beyond 90 days for some questions, but 90 days was and I think 90 days is pretty standard. Most sellers, would agree to that. But that was
and the bank also likes to see that, by the way. Sorry, I'm totally interjecting, but the bank also likes to see that. They don't want the owner to be gone day one, and that's going to be a point of content, and preferably as long as possible. Especially if it's a big business and the owner's very involved, then look to maybe even do 6 months to a year for you to really get, one, it's going to help you, right? It's like if you're coming into this industry raw and you have no idea what you're doing, which is exactly what I did, then it's helpful to have that person a phone call away. So 6 months to a year would be amazing, but 90 days is sufficient, especially if you're hanging out with this person every day. You're going to get just exactly what you need in 90 days. I don't think that, it's that much more.
And I will say to that, right, if you're keeping them for however long, 90 days, so many sellers who say, oh yeah, I can teach you everything you need in 30 days, right? Because they've been doing it for a long time. They don't realize that it took them 30 years or whatever, right, to learn the industry. So they know it like the back of their hands. And you might be very new or green to it. It's different if it's an industry you have a lot of experience with. So I would say in hindsight, so now we have like a 24-page or something like that, I think it keeps growing, SOP document that we realized, okay, we need to start building this stuff up because the owner didn't have that. But I would say if you're keeping them for 90 days or however long, spend time investing in building out the procedures and the SOPs and all of that stuff, because that will be very helpful for when they step away. And for you too, right? Now you have an operating document that keeps growing that your team can always reference. So baking that in as part of the process, so download as much as possible from their head into wherever you could be Google Doc or their tools now, Trainio just local in town to do that. Like so many different tools you can document things in. I would say that's huge, goes a long way.
Yeah, and I think for a people-heavy business, it's helpful to have the owner around for a lot longer than you think. So for us, I came into the business with no experience, a lot of younger team members who relied on the owner to be in the shops all the time. And so it was a shock to them in the first 30 days when I was not in the shop every day. And they were questioning where the owners were at all. They didn't know if I was the owner now, if he was still a partner, like there wasn't a lot of clarity there. So if it's a people-heavy business, having that person around you to sort of like prop you up as well, to say like, hey, this guy's legit, or this girl's legit. Like let's help bring this person onto the team, in a nice way, instead of just cutting the cord and as fast as possible, because that just helps the team ease into it as well. Especially if they see you and the owner interacting, they get a little bit more confidence that you're going to take care of them. So having that was really helpful. But I think my seller was on board for maybe 3 weeks max. Like it was a 90-day agreement, but 3 weeks in, it was like, okay, I think we get the gist of this. Like you can hang out and we can spend time together for a couple more weeks, but as long as you're available over phone for the next 2 months, then that's all I really need. So you can agree to 90, and if things move faster, then and you feel comfortable with it, he or she feels comfortable with it, then call it, you know. So but I would say it's helpful to have them around as long as possible until, and there are some nuances, right? If this owner is still like trying to run the business when you are now the owner, I think that's like, okay, let's officially exchange keys and like remove you from the day to day. But if you're manning the ship, then yeah, let's cut the cord and move on.
And I assume, given the short window of time you asked them to stay around, there wasn't a compensation for that stick around.
No, I would say these smaller businesses, it's pretty common to do a 3 to 6 month window with no comp or no salary or anything. Anything more than that, I would say maybe just like an advisor or consulting agreement, especially if they're like an expert in that space. But no, for me it was 90 days, no comp, available by phone if you're not in person, and anything after that. I mean, we still text all the time, like we're pretty close. And if I have any like random question about how things used to be, and if I'm trying to change some sort of policy or structure, I always go back and say, hey, like, how were you doing things in 2019 or 2020 and things like that. So that's helpful. But yeah, no formal like consulting agreement.
Yeah,
Same thing for you?
Same thing here. No formal consulting agreement, but I also still text him and call him if I have questions, because the industry is pretty tight-knit, and everyone knows everyone and stuff in the cleaning space. So there are some intros I need occasionally, and I reach out to him, and he's been great with that. I was looking at another deal that ended up falling through in the last few months, and for that, we're going to do a mix of they stay on for 3 months, and then consulting agreement after that. If we moved forward and closed on that deal, that would have been how we structured it.
Really quick, I'm just going to pivot back to the process itself, because I know some people in here are looking for their first business to buy. How long did that process take? Like, how long was your search before you found something that actually clicked for you?
So full context, right? I started looking at this seriously 2 years ago. And like, okay, I want to buy a business. You know, searched for 6 months. I found a few. I was going to buy a facial spa at some point, massage and facial spa. Wasn't very comfortable with it, didn't do that. So you get all these deals, right? Like I part of the question, what I would add to that is like, I probably looked at 20 things seriously, or maybe even 50. Like, it's like, oh, I'm going to buy this one. And then it fell through. So entire process till I found the one, shipment cleaning. Probably took about 7 months of searching. And then I found shipment. And then that process from talking to the broker and then asking if she had SBA pre-approved lenders and going through that process to getting it funded and approved. And then, you know, transferring ownership took probably another 50, 60 days, which I hear is relatively short.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
60 days is like it's taking so long, but that's relatively short if you're going the SBA route.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of it, why it was shorter for me, is a smaller deal. A bigger deal size would need more scrutiny and probably more partners and all of that stuff. So it just adds more complexity to the deal. So mine was relatively short.
Yeah. I would say from the first time I connected with a broker, it was about 90 days. But I also, similar to you, looked at smaller deals. Like I knew I didn't want to raise money. I didn't want to have a cap table. I just wanted to have 100% ownership in something. And so I was looking at like sub $2 million deals, and those are a lot more available than anything else. So I wouldn't say a 3 or a 6 month window is common. Most people take a year to 2 years to find something that actually makes sense. And honestly, in hindsight, don't tell anyone I say this, even though it's recorded, I would probably buy a bigger deal.
Same here.
For the lifestyle that I was expecting going into this process, right? I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but there are pieces of there are pieces of this that people tell you, like buy something bigger, because if you don't, you're buying yourself a job, that are actually true. And you don't really, you think, oh, there's an owner, there's a manager, there's a GM, like we're good. They know what to do. I can come in day one and hand this thing to them, but it's just not how it works. So the process can be quick if you buy a sub, let's say just throw 2 million in revenue out. If you buy a sub 2 million in revenue business, you can probably find a deal in a couple of weeks, but that's probably not the best deal unless you want a job, unless you want to work all the time. So.
Yeah, and that's something in hindsight, right? Like if you think about your risk model, like it's very counterintuitive. You think, oh, if I spend less on it, it's better, right? And one of the things, we're talking about earlier, it's like, if you spend less, if it's a smaller deal, then usually like you don't have enough cash flow, cash cushion in there. And now you actually introduce, if you're going the SBA route, if you're raising funds for it, there's going to be debt service that the previous owner didn't have to deal with. And now all of a sudden you've bought a business that now has 5K or whatever to 11K or whatever it is you're paying the SBA bank, right, for debt service. So that eats into your cash flow, obviously. But all of those things that you got to take into consideration. And in hindsight, for me, I probably should have done like a 1 point or so $1 million deal, sub 2, or even like 3.
Yeah, cash flow is always going to be the kicker. It's like if you want to work in it for a year or two to get your feet wet and understand the business, again, going bigger is going to be helpful because you then have cushion to hire somebody to take over that role for you at some point when you do want to remove yourself from the business. If you're doing 200 to 300 in EBITDA, which is what my deal was, you slice that in half yearly with SBA, right? So that's a plus or minus 100 grand right off the top. And then that leaves me with 100 grand. So if I want to hire somebody, I'm paying them 80 to 100 grand. That leaves me with literally $1. So unless you hustle your butt off for the next couple of years to then grow the business, then that's possible. But if you are buying in that sub 2 million range, just be cognizant that for a little while you will be in that business until you can afford to remove yourself. And that's not a bad thing. It's just like understand what you're getting yourself into if you do go the smaller route.
And speaking about understanding what you want to get into, like if you can help it, right, some folks who want to go all in, quit their job and say, I'm going to buy, maybe I have 3 to 6 months of runway, I'm going to buy a business in that time. And it's like, you might find something, but even just finding a business and closing and all of that, it's probably going to take you way longer than that. Multiply by 2 and you have a better idea of the timeline. So that's one of the things as well. Like, oh yeah, lots of boomers are retiring, I'm going to find a business. True, but there's a lot more nuance to that process, and it's not clear cut that you actually find something you want. Because like I said, I looked at probably 20 to 50 deals that I was like, this is the one, right? And then for a variety of reasons, doesn't work out. Yep. So you find a lot of those. And so it's just good to be cognizant of that in terms of timeline and being able to sustain yourself until you find something.
Love that. Okay, going back to like where things are at now, what, in your opinion, was the hardest part post-close up to today? Like what's been the hardest piece of this puzzle from like an ownership standpoint or a team, or like what's been the biggest challenge for you lately?
Yeah, I mean, on the team perspective, I have a relatively small team. I have 4 techs, folks who do the cleaning, and then I have 2 to 3 back office folks, so operations, customer success. I have a web guy who does a lot of our websites and SEO. So that's been really great. So I think the team has moved from what's going on, new owner, and then I hired some more, to performing better. But a bigger aspect for me has been like the sales cycles.
I was literally just going to ask, are you the primary sales
I am the primary salesperson. I just hired a commission-based hourly plus commission-based sales rep. So we'll see how that goes to try to sell us in like different communities for homes, HOAs or retirement communities, or even on the commercial side. So we see how well that does. Well, prior to that, like I was the primary, and I'm still am the primary salesperson. So that's something I wasn't expecting.
What did you expect?
So my focus or my expectation was I was going to do some of the operational stuff. And I was like, we'll build a new website. We'll do some SEO stuff. And we're good. The business is making money already.
Yeah, it's like,
should be fine, right? Sprinkle some pixie dust with technology and it's going to solve all the problems.
Yeah,
no.
one thing on that too, I think everyone looks at the P&L, they're like, oh, they spend no money on marketing. That's it. Like,
if we spend marketing,
all I have to do is
good.
market. It's like, they've been in it for 30 years. Like, don't you think they would have marketed if it worked?
Yeah.
Or if that was like the one unlock to the business. It's like, all we have to do is do social media and we're going to go to the moon. It's like, that's not and so I'm simple. Saying this because that's literally what I told myself. I'm like, oh, they only do Instagram? Oh, this is going to be easy.
Throw LinkedIn in there and Facebook and TikTok and you're killing it.
Exactly. So yeah, if they're not spending money on marketing, there's probably a reason for it.
Yeah, so that was what I thought. Like just work on some operational fixes here and there, build a new website, which we did. We added a few, we upped the CRM we're using so we could do more. But the reality is there's so much more to it, right?
And are you in this, I know you have a full-time W-2, right? 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Are you in this 20 plus hours a week, 40 plus hours a week? Like what's lifestyle wise? I know you have 2 kids.
I stopped counting.
Yeah.
It was depressing me. Probably about 10, 15 hours a week.
Okay.
So I get up early, do some of the outreach stuff. If I need to look at our CRM, like the other day I was analyzing some of the past few years of revenue, trying to find patterns. ChatGPT is really good for this, right? To find patterns and seasonality. What I found is we're getting a lot of work orders, right, at homes, but our minimum right now is $129 to go clean, basic clean at a house for carpet and tile. $129 minimum. I found out we're doing a lot of those, $129, $130, $150, around there. So what I'm working on right now is how can we raise the average on a work order with good services, obviously, and growing that a bit. So I was just working on that in the last week, and that's one insight I just uncovered.
Cool.
So early mornings, maybe lunchtime, maybe after hours, weekends. So it comes out to about 10, 15, maybe 20 hours a week right now.
Yeah. And that's manageable.
Yeah.
Right? For this size business, you're actively trying to grow it. You're the primary salesperson. Like that's not terrible.
Yeah. How about for you? How long are you spending right now?
Truthfully, I would say somewhere in the 20 to 30 hour a week range is where I'm playing. I'm not in the shops as much as the previous owners. I've systemized things, and obviously it's been a year plus, almost 2 years. So there's been time for me to like actively remove myself from being in the stores. But truthfully, going back to your point, there's so much you can do that if you're not doing anything else and you are in that like growth phase under 2 million, like I keep referring back to, I would put as much time into it as possible, especially even if you have a W-2. I know you have obligations outside of work, but like if your goal is to grow the thing, I would spend as much of your freaking time in the thing as possible to, get that ideal lifestyle that you bought the business for in the first place. But that's going to take a little bit of time to get to. So 20 to 30 hours a week, and a lot of that is just quality control, marketing, some ops here and there, and then a lot of just community building and just actively like selling the brand, if you will, and getting it out to the marketplace. So or building awareness in the marketplace. So there's more of biz dev is not an accurate term for retail, but it is somewhat like that. Like I'm out guerrilla marketing and getting the brand out there and in the shops more so just to make sure things aren't falling apart. So
I like that term, the guerrilla marketing.
Yeah.
Like you got to figure out what works, right? in their businesses that have done SEO, ads, and all of that. But what ended up working is handing out flyers at preschools, and it grew to a couple million. Like, so for different businesses, right, it's not cookie cutter for what we actually at your bottom line the best and help you grow. And you have to discover that and find that. And some of that is from experimentation and just spending time on it. And maybe talking with experts. There may be ways to incentivize experts, like to come in either as advisors, build a board for your business.
That's exactly what I'm
Great.
I'm glad you brought that up. 'Cause
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm doing now. And in the last month or so, I've been building that agreement and talking with 2 or 3 people to say, hey, what would it look like for you to come on as, let's just say a board member, and help advise us in the best way possible, whether it's a marketing expert, a food service expert, an ops expert, like somebody who's been there, done that. And that's going to help you not only in the business day to day, but if you're looking at raising money, if you're looking at selling one day, like all of those people are going to be huge assets to any conversations that you're having. So for me, if I have, a restaurateur or, the best marketer on the planet on my team, that pulls a lot of weight, especially since I don't have 20 years of restaurant experience. So if I'm looking at partnerships or investors, like having that, on a deck, even, right? It's like
huge.
This person's part of our team.
Yeah.
That is a massive conversation starter.
Yeah, absolutely.
On that
Question.
note, have you guys ever, is it common or practice to trade or barter, instead of me giving you buying it for $50,000, hey, I do have marketing experience, can we barter my time for equity? Is that
Yeah. So the structure that I'm looking at now is, let's just throw like 5%, right? 5% equity for 5 hours a week or 5 hours a month. And we have one in-person session and one virtual, or let's say you're just available over call for a couple hours a month. That alone to me, especially if you've been in the business for 30 years, a 10-minute phone call once a week is more than enough for me. I can get one nugget a week from you, and you can help me avoid steering in the wrong direction. And for 5%, I think that's pretty fair, especially for somebody who's likely close to retirement, has other sources of income, so isn't relying on a salary. Like, they just want to help and support other businesses. So to give them, even honestly, if the business is solid and it's producing cash, even 1% is pretty freaking good for a couple hours a week of time, right? So, depending on the size, you can structure it differently, but I'm looking at anywhere between 1% and 5% equity for 2 to 3 people, and all with all different expertises and lines of go for it.
Right. It's like, with equity, though,
Yeah.
going back to sort of the experts, right, legal and QOE and that, those fees, are they in the 90% from the SBA? Are they the 10%? Are they outside of all of that? Is there a way to structure those fees?
Yeah.
So you don't out of pocket, or?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So if you didn't hear it, it was, how do you structure, or where do those fees for working with experts fall? Are they part of that 10% down? Are they structured in some creative way, or is that all out of pocket throughout the deal? I think different experts will probably structure their fees in certain ways. So they might even ask for equity, or they could say, okay, you don't have 20 grand, give us 1%, or pay us over 6 months, or pay us over a year. I think there's 1,000 different ways to do it. But for the most part, I have seen fee up front, whether it's split in 2 months or 3 months, but the fee is outside of that 10%. It's outside of your banking relationship or your finance terms completely. So if you're working with a Q of E guy or gal, it's going to be anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000, and that's going to be a payment plan with them, or just a one-time fee with them individually. And same with attorneys and all that. Obviously, $250 to $500 an hour, and you're going to pay that outside of the deal itself. But if you can, most people are open to creative financing. right? Especially if they're a small business themselves. So I would just test, like, would you do this over 90 days? Would you do this over 6 months? Like, that's what I'm doing with my accounting team. I don't want to spend, $5,000 to go back through 2023 and 24 to review our financials. So I'm like, let's do a 6-month payment plan. So that it just frees up cash for you, and you have more cash going into the deal as well.
And then along that, banking,
Yeah.
can you those are upfront fees, and you don't want to inject a bunch of cash, can you then, will the SBA consider that as part of the expenses of an acquisition, or they're pretty?
Well, it's a gray area, right? You can add that to your working capital. And then again, outside of the SBA stuff, you talk with the provider, the expert, like QOV provider or whatever, or legal, if they're open to it. Like you said, most of them want a fee up front, but there are all kinds of ways you can structure it where if you add it out to your working capital, the challenge is the deal needs to close. And you don't know that it will close. Like QOV, for example, it's a catch-22 because you're doing QOV to see if you should close on this deal or not. So imagine if their payment is tied into the deal, and all of a sudden they discover, oh crap, you shouldn't close on this deal, right? So now they don't get paid it's a gray area. If it's very clear cut, they might be open to it. But I've seen QOV providers who would take equity in exchange for payment or do a payment plan or something. So technically you could do that, but like in that scenario, right, it's like you don't know. That's why you're hiring them to see if you should close or not. So if their payment is tied into success for close, then it's a weird situation if you don't close.
Yeah. So you're liable for that if it doesn't close and they already did the work. So I would start with structuring it creatively. Like if you are doing this per deal, right? If you're like, I need to bring a QOV guy for every deal that I go under LOI with, maybe you do almost like a retainer structure, or maybe you do like a larger fee and you review up to 20 deals for me, right? Like there's a few different ways versus just 10K per deal or something like that. So, but personally speaking, I didn't use QOV, I didn't use an attorney and all of that. So I'm not by far an expert around the service providers, but they're definitely use them for even the smallest deals. They're worth 20K versus you not spending the 20K and then losing 100K because the deal's not good. So
yeah, like for example, the last deal I backed out of was a $1 million deal. So it was seller is going to get about $850 upfront and then $50K over 5 years. Which we talk about creative financing, $50K over 5 years with a 2-year we wouldn't pay anything for 2 years, right? It carry that, and then the payment kicks in year 3. So go to QOV provider, and we found some stuff. So ended up not closing and moving forward on that deal. QOV provider got just like $3K, and then they were going to have some equity skin in the game. And right now, like it's floating equity. So any other deal I work on next, they have $3K worth ownership of that. So that was one creative way we went around that, where I wasn't overextended. In terms of what I paid out of pocket, it's like $10K to the seller, which I never got back. But with what we found, that's still cheaper than if I closed on that deal.
Yeah.
In terms of potential liabilities later and like money I'd lose. Yeah. So that was nothing in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, the scary part is always committing to like financial review or anything, not knowing if the deal is going to close or not. But if it's a serious deal and you're like really confident about it, I think it's definitely worth losing 20 grand if the deal doesn't fall through, or if the deal doesn't fall, however the heck you say that. Or if the deal does fall through, it's going to save you a lot more in the long run. So it's worth the investment. What's that?
So your hindsight suggestion was going for a bigger deal, meaning like over 2 million?
Not necessarily over 2 million. I would, like, there are businesses that are a lot more profitable than food service, right? So even if you're doing 1.5 in revenue, then look for something that's maybe doing 450 to 500 in EBITDA or just net income, right? If there's 50% like net margins there, that's a great business. But for the food space, you're looking at, anywhere from 10 to 20% margins. And so on a $1.1 million deal, you're looking at about 2 to 300K in EBITDA or close to net income, a little bit less than that. So the revenue is not always the North Star. It's just how profitable the business is.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, guys. Go for it.
The industry standard
Yeah.
versus just the
Absolutely. Yeah, because there could be a $20 million restaurant doing 5K in net income. So even if you look at a $20 million deal, you're like, wow, this is a huge business. This is amazing. Shawn told me to go big, and you run the numbers and he's making $5,000.
Yeah, it's not about how much it's making per se, it's what they get to keep
Yeah, so
at the end of the day, right?
So yeah, I mean, look at revenue. I would look at revenue first, but keep that tied to the industry itself, and compare the size of the business to like what industry standard is.
One follow-up. When you were looking at the deals, did you have a range of what the multiple would be that you thought comfortable?
Not necessarily, and you could probably speak to this better than me, but every industry has a different multiple, to be honest. And depending on the size of the business, depending on profitability, every multiple is going to be different, right? So if I'm looking at the food service space as a whole, you can look at a Fox restaurant that's, the Henry and some of these concepts that you guys are familiar with. That's probably going for 10 to 20 times EBITDA. A mom and pop or a sub like 5 million revenue is probably going to go for 3 to 7 at times EBITDA. So there's levels to it, and it's not going to be standard across the board, especially when you have really established brands, really profitable brands versus non-profitable brands. There's a whole slew of things that go into how to multiply something, but there's not a standard for sure, from my experience at least.
How did both of you guys look at future earning potential when you first were assessing the deal? I know there's, ad marketing and technology, but if you were looking at hard numbers, you say, if I just did nothing but kept running it as it is, or if I did X, Y, and Z, how did you look at the future earning?
Yeah, when I was looking at my deal, it was mostly around how they were growing since 2017 or so, and they were growing about 20 to 30% a year. So to your point, if I did nothing and I didn't tank the business or make any crazy decisions, then hopefully we can assume that over the next handful of years, we should grow at the same pace. Unless external factors come into play, you have COVID, you have all these things, but that's a given. But if we're just looking at the normal pace of things, then that was my initial assessment. And then tying the marketing piece and all that to it, my thought was, cool, even if I do 5% more activity than the previous owner or the previous management team, then we will grow by X percent. And I couldn't really give you a percent on that growth because it was never done before in the business. But if even just 5% more volume from a social media standpoint, marketing out in the community, like doing just a little bit more, how would that not grow your business? So if he was doing 0 of that, then we can predict a little bit more than the typical 20 to 30% growth a year. So it wasn't any there wasn't any deep analysis there from a growth perspective. Obviously, we modeled things out and we said, okay, if we continue to grow 20 to 30% a year, what is that going to look like for us from a financial standpoint? And we had models for that, but my growth plan was, let's just do 5% more than what the owner was doing, and we should be in a better position in a couple of years from now.
Yeah, very, very similar to yours. Had models and stuff, but with boots on ground, learning the industry now, I'm like, I'll gladly take all those models I had behind the barn and shoot them all, right? Because it goes out the window. But at least that was kind of how I was looking at it as well. Like, okay, it's growing. It's had some ups and downs. But one of the things I looked at was the recession. It had to be recession proof or at least resistant, right? Where if there's a recession or something like COVID, I wanted to see if the business would be able to sustain that. So I did a little bit of stress testing on it just to see, and it seemed good. I mean, during COVID, right, cleaning was an essential service. So they actually did well during COVID. Same thing in a recession. On the commercial side especially, they will keep cleaning, right? No one's going to come to your restaurant or commercial space if it's dirty, for example. So there were things like that I looked at. No sophistication to it at all, but just like looking at some indicators of, okay, this is still needed even when the economy takes a dip. We'd still be able to get jobs to go clean. It's kind of how I looked at it.
Love that. Okay, looking, in hindsight, what advice, what general like words of wisdom do you have? I know that's kind of a loaded question, but is there anything, like any specific takeaway from a searcher or for a searcher, for a business buyer that wants to buy a second, third, fourth, fifth deal, anything?
I would say don't lone wolf it, right? It's very lonely. It's a very lonely journey trying to be an entrepreneur. Those who have businesses already or have done one, like, how it goes, right? You're taking on indemnity for a risk. Your employees, for lack of a better term, they don't really give a darn, right? They want to get paid, obviously, and work in a good place, but like it's all on your shoulders, and that's a very lonely road. So trying to go through research and build a business and stuff, like very lonely. So I'd say earlier on, if you're not plugged into communities already, like that is huge. You learn so much by osmosis just talking with them, and I did this last week, I did this 2 weeks ago, I know this guy, he helped me do X. Like that is worth its weight in gold. And it's not like it's not quantitative where you can see.
Yeah.
And you never know when you might need that advice, but
It just makes you feel better.
it just makes you feel
Honestly,
better. You have
yeah.
a support network. So I would say if you don't have that, like, absolutely do that. I've tried to do this solo thing on my own in the past, and it's brutal. That's how you burn out and, get in trouble. So that's one of the things I would say, like, get into good communities, good folks that have an abundance mindset, want to work with you, and just engage with them. That goes a long way.
I have nothing to add to that. I totally agree. Just get around other people that have done it or are currently in the process of doing it, and just hang with them and just get an understanding of what they're doing, right, wrong, all of that. They can hopefully steer you in the right or wrong direction, or right direction, excuse me. And just going back to what I said, it just makes you feel like you are not effing up, because everybody is, especially if you're buying something, everybody's going to go through that like wonky year of like trying to take it over, and team doesn't love it, and there's just a lot of ups and downs. And so there's so much around just making yourself feel better and sort of seeing the light and pushing through and having people around you.
A funny story on that, right? I was talking with someone about credit card debt. One of the things that it was, to try to scale and stuff, about 30 grand or so worth of that. I was looking at another entrepreneur, and he's like, I have 180. And I was like,
and that's, to your point, there's levels to this, right? People are like we're stressing about $1 million SBA loan, and they're like, dude, my team has like $50 million in bank debt right now. Like, you think you're stressed? And so there's always levels to it, and being around other people that have been there, done that, just makes you feel like, like we're good. We're gonna be all right.
I'll survive. You survive.
Exactly.
Type of deal.
All right. Any crazy questions before we wrap up, or we can chat for as long as you guys want? Go, either one.
Between the purchase price and the sales price, was it the same? And if not, what was the rationale for what you offered?
So I'll let you go, but I'll just reiterate the question. So between the sales price and the purchase price, going into the deal, do you mean when you submit an LOI at, let's say, I intend to buy this business at this price, did it end up falling like in that range or at that specific number? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, go for it.
For mine, I think I got it for like 50K less, and in my LOI, I just justified that, and they were cool with going lower. because that was what at the time I was able to sustain or what I was comfortable with. It wasn't a back and forth negotiation thing. I think the kickback, it did a counter offer. I even forget what it is that they talked about, but we didn't go back and forth a lot, maybe once, and that was it.
Yeah, I would say the same. What changed the price? So I came in a little higher, honestly, to lock the deal up, selfishly. But when we actually went through with the deal, relative to what I discovered, right, real revenue, real projections, like all of the things that you can only see once you dive into the financials, that adjusted the price down a little bit, but it wasn't way off. I think seasoned brokers do a good job of pricing companies out, so it's usually fairly accurate. But if you don't have a seasoned broker and they just want to get a ton of LOIs, they just want to get a ton of attention on the business, they'll likely price it really low, or they'll fudge some things. They'll say EBITDA is like 3 times what it really is, and so you'll come in and you'll come guns a-blazing and submit a great LOI, and then you look at the numbers and they're making $500,000 less than they advertised. And so there are situations like that, but I think it's very common for the price to change after you do analysis, because no one's that accurate unless they've been doing this for a long time, and no business owner who has never done it, who has never actually sold a business, is like structuring their P&Ls and all of their info and documents in a solid way. So you have some time to analyze the real numbers, and then just come back to the drawing table and say, hey, because of this, and this, let's adjust the price, or else we can't make the deal.
Yeah, totally. Everything he said, I have nothing to add to that.
What you got?
Just a quick question. Are you both buying to grow and then sell, or are you buying to grow and grow and grow? Like,
Want me to go?
kind of keep it,
You could go.
grow more businesses.
So when I first bought, my vision was legacy business, wanting to pass this on, grow this to the moon, and go from there, and maybe work on other projects, or this be the main thing for however long it takes for me to remove myself, but still have it be a part of my world. It's somewhat the same, but I've shifted to being open to see if there is a sale, or there's a partnership, or there's something else than me just growing it by myself, or bringing on partners to just grow it for 60 years. I've realized that I enjoy owning companies, and more like I like being an operator, but I like overseeing the day-to-day, but not doing the day-to-day. And I would say that's probably the same for many of you. But being a solo operator does not allow me to see big vision. I am like in the weeds, and so if there is a way for me to bring on other partners or investors to put me in the best position to be successful in my life and for the business, then great. But my original thesis was, let's just grow this thing to the moon, and I'll operate it until I can't anymore. But it's shifted a little bit. It's still going to be in the portfolio, if you will, but the goal is to not run this business for forever, and bring on some experts who can, or build relationships and partnerships to grow into other verticals and things like that. So I see it more as like a launch to other ventures and other acquisitions. And that, kind of going back to the smaller deal, I think that's actually really helpful in many ways to prep you for future deals. Like if it's not a slam dunk and it's not the best deal in the world, as long as it doesn't fail, then it's a win. Like you've done a deal, you understand the process, you're seasoned now, you are going to be taken more seriously. because the hardest part of closing a deal is actually being taken seriously by brokers and experts and all that, right? So now that you've done one, even though you're not this crazy millionaire now that everyone says you will be, you've done a deal. And so, now you have credibility, and you can go to just about any broker now and say, hey, I've
Confidence, I will add.
yeah, and the confidence
big
piece.
deal.
Yep. So that's that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I resonate with that a lot. See it working? Y'all hear me? Oh,
Here.
thank you. I resonate with what he said a lot. Like when I went into it, I was thinking, like, I'll grow this thing, build a legacy, and I'm still thinking that, but my mindset has changed a bit where I'm thinking more the portfolio approach, right? This is my first deal. I plan to buy more and roll it up under one parent entity and keep doing that. Because quite frankly, like, you gotta love the game to stay in it. It's kind of it's brutal to learn all the lessons, but like once you do one, you develop an appetite for more. You're like, okay, I want to do a slightly bigger one. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it, like where it all rolls under one portfolio. Now, whether we sell the whole thing or sell off some of them at some point for the right reasons and to find the right partners, that might be of interest. But I'm in it to win it and just keep growing them and slowly grow that way with other acquisitions as we go along. But that's kind of how my thesis has evolved.
Yeah. And it's relative to your goals, right? Like if you just want a lifestyle business, then yeah, buy something smaller and you can work 20, 30 hours a week. You aren't dependent, you don't have this huge team. Like there's not a lot of management, and you can just have this nice, like, steady business that grows forever. But if your goal is to be an investor, then you're going to take the portfolio approach, or you're going to build an investor network to help you acquire more deals. And you're not going to buy a 250 grand EBITDA business. That's just not going to work for your goal. Like, you're going to be in the business all the time. So it's just relative to your goal. Because I know a lot of searchers who simply just want to get out of their current day-to-day, and they are totally fine working 80 hours a week for their small business, right? And that's totally fine, and you can have an amazing outcome with that, but that's likely not a lot of other people's goal.
Yeah.
And some people just want to, they want to be Warren Buffett, or they want to be these big time investors that aren't in the weeds. So you just have to identify.
I see we just hit
What works.
12:37.
It's 12:37.
Yeah. So if anyone has,
If you guys are cool with hanging, I'm good hanging. We can call it, or if you guys have any more questions, yeah, shoot.
So talking about being an entrepreneur versus running a business, if you're happy with that, did either of you consider franchise versus just?
I did. That's a great question. I didn't consider franchise on the front end because I wanted to own the whole thing and have the ability to basically do whatever I wanted in the business, right? I didn't want to be confined to a specific marketing toolkit, a specific brand, and if that brand didn't have the image that I loved, I just didn't want to have. I wanted to have say in how we did things. So on the front end, no, but looking at future deals, and if I knew then what I know now, I would have heavily considered a franchise, because there's a lot of benefit to acquiring something that is super profitable and has been around for 30 years and has a playbook already built out for you, right? Let's say we're looking at food service, a Taco Bell is much more predictable than a 3-location ice cream chain. And Taco Bell's been around for 60 years, and it's very, very developed. And if you look at, I was just talking about, bringing investment into the deal that we have now, and it's a lot easier to raise money for even one Taco Bell than it is one ice cream location, even if we were doing the same numbers. It's just brand reputation, predictability, like everything that an investor loves. That's a lot easier, right? A Chick-fil-A and like all of these big brands, you can go to any bank and they will gladly give you money. So if you're looking at opportunities to grow, if you're looking at predictability, that's what a franchise will provide for you. and you have less autonomy, but that's not always a bad thing, right? I think a lot of people operate well in confines, in the bumpers, right?
Yeah.
If we're like a bowling alley, it's like that's going to be helpful if you haven't done this before.
Yes.
And just
Sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
And the reason I ask is I was doing comparison to that, right? And I think like the SBA has a pre-approved franchise directive
Oh yeah,
that you can just go in and be like, yeah,
that's
to your, exactly to
Yeah.
your point, right?
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I resonate with that a lot. About for my first deal, I wanted autonomy and control and stuff. But now, especially as I think from the portfolio perspective and buying more stuff under my portfolio, very open to franchises, so long as it's been around for a while, there's a playbook and all of that stuff. Because you find a lot of new franchises as well.
Yeah.
So you could add it to your buy book, right, for what your buy box, what you're looking for, criteria-wise, like it's been around for this long, and I think, industry reputation and things like that goes a long way. But for me, yeah, at first I went from being nope on franchises to, oh, actually, that's not a bad idea after going through the sludge and hustling through it on a one, location, 13-year-old business.
And I always go back to like what's your goal, right? If you want to be a restaurateur, that looks a lot different than being a chef, right? So if you want to be a chef, like buy the small mom and pop retail location that you have complete autonomy over. You can change the menu, you can do whatever you want, you can market it however you want. Or if you want to be a restaurateur, buying big chains or buying predictable food service franchises is a lot more predictable, and it's going to lend well to your lifestyle because you don't have to be in that business all day. Like they have outlined every possible position for you, so you are the actual owner and not, you're not flipping burgers. And so you have your GMs, you have your assistant managers, you have all that stuff pretty much ready to go when you buy this thing. So
Risk profile much lower.
much lower, much lower.
Much lower.
Go for it.
Yeah, so when you're looking from a portfolio standpoint, how would you be structuring your business to be able to grow in that fashion? What are you doing? Are you having, because right now I think it's just you own that company. Are you gonna move it to like a holding company that holds the other one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right on.
Yeah, I think we could probably answer the same way. It's when you buy the first deal, structure it according to the cap table. Like if you have other investors, give them equity according to just that LLC. And if you plan on acquiring more companies, then I would. And again, I'm not a legal expert, so don't take my structure for take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, a holdco and separate LLCs for the other concepts or the other businesses that you're working on is going to be key. So
Yeah.
So in that,
Everything you said.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
did you buy the business as a business buying that business or you buying it?
So I bought it as a business buying a business. So my LLC is a business. I am a partner or an owner in that LLC, but my LLC bought that business. So my LLC took over the operations of that LLC. I actually acquired the LLC and basically removed all operations and payroll and all of that from the old one to my new one. I still have that LLC, but it's just sitting. But my business bought that business. So
Oh, you didn't have to invest.
Nope. But if I did, then yeah, they could structure it two ways, right? It could be individual investor, just puts in their personal capital, and now that person owns equity in my LLC, or they're a partner in the LLC, or their investment firm, if they're a company, buys into the LLC that owns my concept.
Yeah.
Or they would, if they were an investor in the portfolio, then their individual or their firm would be a partner in my holdco, right? If they owned a portion or if they invested in the portfolio as a whole and not just an individual concept. So
Yeah, and I would say like they're experts who can help like structure those deals for you, right? Legal experts that just focus on business law, and some CPAs offer that as well. So like I would say like it's worth looking at depending on the industry or on the best way to structure it. But generally, like, that's
Yeah,
just right
like
on.
S corp versus C corp, and all of that is just going to be so dependent on industry and your structure versus like we're an S corp. Ask me why, who freaking knows? But you know we are, and so
Yeah.
I am not an expert in whether you should do an S corp, C corp, LLC. You know, there's a whole lot of tax incentives and things like that that go into these decisions.
Yeah.
And it's so relative to your situation. But if you are looking to build a portfolio, just open an LLC that's a holding company, and don't give it, don't give it specific structure yet, but just have that, and then open your individual LLCs for every business or every concept that you purchase, and that holdco is essentially the management firm for all of those individual LLCs.
And one pro tip, right? Even if you're thinking down the road, you might go to the route of having a holdco and stuff. Like, it's useful if that holdco has business credit, and longevity matters, right? So even if you're not sure yet, structure LLC. Again, I'm not a legal expert, but like usually LLCs are pretty adaptable to a lot of different things. Like you do an LLC, even if you're thinking in 5, 10 years even, like you might use this thing as a holdco. Get it going and you just use it to establish business credit. Each business has a DUNS number, DUNS number, which is what that's the entity that the credit bureaus look at for business credit. So you can get that going and start doing some things here and there with it, get a bank account and blah, blah, blah. So that long term, if you're looking to raise funds or get a bank account or something like that, like you've had business credit for a while. So pro tip there, not a legal expert, but I found that out the hard way from trying to get some funding and stuff. Banks look at that stuff.
Yep, agreed. Sorry.
I think.
How do you guys feel?
If
Do you have anything else you want to chop up? I'm free for. I got 14 minutes.
Same here.
Yeah.
I'm actually going through an SBA loan now. So
Okay.
I don't answer any funding you asked earlier.
Awesome.
You will need to collateralize the loan.
Yes.
I think this business, you have assets, so I'm not sure if they use those collateral.
Yeah.
Personally, people will put a lien on all my property, but you have to do that if you need that. They do always buy it under an LLC and even have set up a trust. When you're a trust will own that LLC, if you're not there. 3, always structure as an asset sale, not a stock sale. So that'll like. And then something else about the seller staying on, something I learned recently, they can't stay on for more than 2 years. Otherwise, considered still an owner.
Yeah.
One more thing I'm going to remember now.
The power of community right here. It's like sharing. It's awesome. No, I like that. That's all a great point. Yeah.
One more thing. I think all in your earnings report, they are so expensive, most people won't do it. It's like a pretty big business. But at least hire somebody who can help you do diligence. And I'd say, like, I'm a CPA by the way, so I do that a lot.
Nice.
That's a bare minimum. Have somebody help you do diligence.
Yes.
What did you guys do, by the way, so far? Where due diligence, like, how do you go? Did you go on the list yourself? What do you do?
It was both for me. I had for my due diligence, I came up with a list, and then
I'm just
I
gonna
worked
use the
with
restroom
someone.
really quick.
I worked with someone to do like some of the due diligence stuff, and they came up with more criteria to look at. So it's a mixed bag.
Were they able to use the assets of the company you're buying as collateral?
Yeah. So I didn't have to use my personal assets, thankfully, because for me that was a big part of the criteria. Yeah.
The biggest issue or the biggest fear that they have, like I get where I personally guarantee stuff, but I'll give with that. But they will literally put a lien on my property. That makes me really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
The low down payment, probably worth it.
Yeah, I mean, there are ways to de-risk, right? Depending on what the business is doing in cash flow and revenue and all, how long they've been around. Like it's something you have to be very careful about, right? Because if the economy were to go south or some unforeseen contingency and things go south, it's like, are you okay with a lien on your property and stuff like that? But yeah.
How much would either in your case or is it like an SBA loan broker, like Do they make you aware of that stuff? Do they educate you at all? Or they're just like, fill out this form and you're on your own?
It depends. I don't know if yours probably shared. Some will give you details and are you sure about this because this is XYZ. But some brokers just want to close a deal and, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to tell you. I didn't tell you that. You will find a lot of those too.
I don't have my own broker, so the seller has a broker they're working with. Technically, I guess he's considered a co-broker, so I guess he is my broker, but I can't necessarily trust everything they're saying. When he sent me like a request today, the seller had a question, same thing, they were asking for bank statements. And he's like, I don't feel comfortable sharing bank statements. And the broker could have just said, hey, this is a pretty common thing, you should just share them. We did it, he pushed it on to me, said, hey, we provided a response. So I called him, hey, this is a pretty common thing. You talk to him? He's like, oh yeah, it's very common, I'll talk to him. So he knew that from the start, but his interest is closing the deal.
Yeah, you find a lot of those. And another thing too, some banks will provide some level of due diligence, right? They'll stress test it and stuff. But what I have found is they're not looking for your best interest. The bank is trying to make sure that you can pay the loan. So a lot of what they look at will be from that perspective. If you want to pay yourself extra, they don't care about all that stuff. So that's something to keep in mind, right? If the bank says, oh yeah, we do due diligence as part of it, that's great. But remember, they're looking from the perspective of, can this business sustain you paying us back the debt service for the loan, which you need. But if you have more criteria, like being able to pay yourself minimum of 150 grand and things like that, then it's on you, right, to find that out. So we're just talking about due diligence and what the bank will look at and stuff.
Talking to Brian earlier about the same thing, I think, if you're considering a bank to get SBA pre-qualified with, is interview the banks to see if they're the right bank for you as well. I was telling him I've met several banks and ended up going with one that I didn't have a relationship with, because when I got on the phone with them, I asked an incredible amount of questions about, how do you help me? What resources do you have? How many SBA loans did you do last year or the year prior? And I found out that they did exponentially more transactions than the other two banks that I had conversations with. And then I asked why. And they go through their history, they go through their types of deals. Some banks are very SBA focused banks, and others are just banks who do SBA.
Yeah.
And it's a really, I think if you're looking for things, call your portal.
Yeah.
Talk to a guy and ask any questions possible.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's how help with the banker was. He taught stuff that I had no idea about, like deferring payments on seller financing.
Mhm.
Don't defer payments, like even $1 a month. Pay anything, because after 2 years you can refinance that and roll it into an SBA loan. But you have to wait for 24 months of payments. So it's like, don't defer, like if you defer, like set it up, structure it a certain way and stuff like that. I had no idea about. So yeah, the SBA lenders are paid.
And there are banks that, the bank doesn't want you to fail, right? So even if you're getting to a point where you're saying, okay, our revenue's dropping, our EBITDA's dropping, you go to your bank and ask the question, how can you guys help me turn this around? They'll have resources too. That's what I'm learning by interviewing the banks.
Yeah.
Stuff that isn't just on paper, here's the loan terms.
Exactly. Yeah, they can give you a lot of insight into how they're, like, what they're even open to doing deal-wise. Because there's, like carrybacks and standbys and all of these different things that you can do with the bank. And so it's helpful to just like, hey, what are you guys open to doing? If I didn't do 10% down, like how could we structure this? If I brought the seller into play, ask those types of questions. And then, yeah, to your point, interview them just as much as they're, interviewing you, and see if it's the right fit.
Absolutely.
Did you have to ask for, I guess, after the deal, did you have a line of credit for working capital, or is that something the bank kind of put in place with you, or how did that work?
Not automatic, but for me, right, I had working capital as part of the deal. I baked that in, so it was cash, wasn't a line of credit. And then my bank doesn't have products like credit cards or lines of credit, and so they just do SBA finance. And they have a checking account, some other things like that, but nothing that I needed at the time. So I figured that out on my own for partners to work with.
I feel like I need to say something at this point because I'm a business banker, actually. If anybody wants to like dig into anything business banking related, definitely dig into that too.
Okay.
I come from a larger bank, as you know,
Yeah.
and it was very red tape, very policy driven, very limited on the products we can offer. In my experience, we've never wanted, and I'm speaking on behalf of banking institutions, we never want to go SBA because we want to have a great relationship with the client. It's essentially mitigating risk. It's government-backed financing, but it's a long process oftentimes. Like 120 days typically is the deal that loan will remain active for, and after that you need to reapply. And oftentimes SBA financing will take 2 or 3 months, depending on who you're working with.
Yep.
Both banks I've worked through are SBA preferred lenders. I'm at US Bank now, out in the field, so it's cool to see business owners in person. But from the big bank, I'll just say it, JP Morgan Chase, big bank that I was at, to here, there's like 3 times more products. So when it comes to SBA financing, that's not ideal, but if you take that route, it will take longer. It is easier to subordinate if you need some other like business line of credit, and at that point, then you're digging into some revolving line that you're digging into. That will look at how long the business has been active, revenue share. Oftentimes they'll give you 10 or 20% of annual revenues. Some require a relationship with that bank specifically, 6 or 12 months. It's just kind of all up in the air. But I just wanted to reiterate that banks want to see business owners do well. SBA isn't necessarily the only route, although it was great here in this case.
Thanks for adding that, Darley.